Have you ever been confused by horticultural plant names and all the things that go along with them? Cultivars, hybrids? Today I want to explain horticultural nomenclature, going directly to the source, which is the International Code of Nomenclature for Cultivated Plants. I have read through this extremely nerdy text multiple times so that hopefully you do not have to. In this video, I'm just going to cover the very basics of the main botanical nomenclature and then the horticultural deviations, which are cultivars and hybrids. So even though that doesn't sound like very much, there's a lot of nuance that this document provides that you may not have heard from other sources, so stay tuned. First, let's take a step back and recall the origins of our plant naming conventions. Linnaeus is credited with inventing a binomial system of nomenclature where each plant has two names, sort of like most people have a first and a last name. These two most important names for plants are the genus and species, or specific epithet. While I will be discussing these low-level names, what they are and how to write them properly, they are also part of a larger system of classification that includes family, order, etc. I want to take a moment to explain why I think plant classification is so important. Humans are unique in having language, specifically written language, through which we can pass knowledge. Knowing the name of a cultivar, for instance, allows me to gather information about it while I'm growing it in my own garden, and then communicate that information to another person very easily, say, on the internet. Without a name to reference, each individual growing the plant must learn on their own how to grow it, and they too lack the ability to confidently transfer that information to somebody else because they're not sure if the plant that they're talking about is the same someone else is talking about. In essence, a name is a placeholder for an object that allows us to gather information about the object without it being present. It turns language into a superpower, but in order to harness that superpower, we all need to learn the same system of communication. Our system of botanical nomenclature generates rules so that we all formulate and use names in the same way, ensuring that we can communicate effectively. It also ensures that we are sharing information about the same entity, which I think is the most common misstep that happens in horticultural settings. Now that we know why it's important, let's get back to the names. Let's start with the first portion of the botanical name that you will see everywhere, which is the genus. The word genus comes from the Latin word genus generis, which means race, stock, kind, family, birth, descent, or origin. Sorry, I'm reading from the computer. Although the order is switched in human names, I like to think of the genus as the last name of the plant, because all the plants within a genus are closely related, like all the members of a family typically share a last name. These genus names are Latin words, they are italicized, and the first letter is capitalized. Now, this information about how to format genus names is not explicitly mentioned in the code that I'm reading because it is based on the other nomenclature code that is even a level higher than this horticultural one. We're going to use the popular black-eyed Susan as our main example. This plant is in the genus Rudbeckia. The next part of the Latin name is the species name, which is technically called the specific epithet. I like to think of the species name like the first name of a person if we're continuing our first and last name analogy. The specific epithet is also a Latin word, and it is also italicized. The first letter in the specific epithet is not capitalized. In our example of Rudbeckia fulgida, the specific epithet is fulgida. While genus and specific epithet are the two main parts of the botanical name, there's also a third level, which is variety or subspecies. I like to think of variety or subspecies like the middle name of the plant, if we're continuing to roll with that analogy, because some people have one middle name, some people have like four, so. Like I said, this third level of botanical nomenclature includes variety or subspecies. I'm not actually sure what the distinction is between variety and subspecies, but they are both a level below botanical species. Within a species, there can be one or many subspecies, and essentially they are just differences below the level of species that are distinguishable based on characteristics or ecology or genetics, there's a variety of different things that it could be. The main thing, though, is that a variety or a subspecies will continue to occur and exist on its own without human intervention. These names are listed after genus and species with a qualifier such as variety or subspecies, so that's VAR dot or SUBSP dot. After the qualifier comes the Latin word, which is italicized and not capitalized. You're probably seeing the theme here. So in our example, we have Rudbeckia fulgida, variety Sullivantii. I will note here that you can use, for subspecies, SUBSP, but you can also use SSP, but I would not recommend using SSP, for that exact reason, which is that it is very easy to confuse with SPP, which is used to denote multiple species. So if I'm growing a bunch of buckwheats in my garden, I could say I have Eriogonum SPP species, and you wouldn't want to confuse that with Eriogonum subspecies. I guess the context is pretty clear, but it's still useful. And then one side note here is that if you just have one Eriogonum species in your garden, but you don't know what it is, or you just are lazy and you want to just say, I have one species, you can use Eriogonum SP dot. That's what you use for a single species. Here is another fun example of a species with a variety, Phalocactus hexadraphorus, variety Fossulatus. We grew these from seed at Grow Nursery. Aren't they so cute? One other thing to note with the qualifier is that while the Latin portions are italicized, the VAR dot or SUBSP dot are not italicized. And a general rule of thumb to follow is that anything in Latin is going to be italicized and anything in English is going to not be italicized. There's one caveat to that rule, which I will talk about in just a little bit. This brings us nicely into the next part of the name, which is the cultivar. The word cultivar itself combines two words, cultivated and variety. It is a word used for plants that would not survive in this specific form without the human intervention of continued cultivation. It usually refers to plants with a very specific genetic makeup that almost always originates from one plant that is then propagated to generate more plants. I'm going to read you the official definition for a cultivar based on the code here. It's section 2.3. A cultivar, as a taxon, is an assemblage of plants that A, has been selected for a particular character or combination of characters, and B, remains distinct, uniform, and stable in these characters when propagated by appropriate means. Parentheses, but see Article 9.1, Note 1. I'm not going to go there. You can go read that if you want. So, for example, at Grow, we found this individual in a batch of seedlings. This is agave seedlings that was variegated. And so technically we could have made that into a cultivar, and that cultivar would not have continued to exist on without human intervention. And it wouldn't continue to exist because it's very likely that if this was propagated by seed, that it would just lose that genetic mutation that caused it to be variegated. The code covers all the specific ways a plant can be propagated to be considered a cultivar. If you're curious, go read it. And it's honestly just impressive how many ways plants can be propagated. Cultivars are not italicized, and the first letter of every word is capitalized, as noted in Article 21.3. The cultivar is placed within single quotes. This is noted in sections 8A.1 and 14.1. 14.1 also notes that you can't use CV dot, like cultivar, or VAR dot anymore. Apparently that was allowed before, but now they want it only in single quotes. Single quote. A cultivar also notably cannot be trademarked. It can be patented, but it cannot be trademarked, and a trademark phrase cannot be placed within single quotes as if it were a cultivar. If a trade name is being used in reference with a plant, it always needs to be included with the legitimate cultivar name. Anyway, I want to make another video about trademarks and patents because I think that's an interesting thing, and it's a whole rabbit hole. So we're not going there today. In our plant example, we now have the full name with the cultivar. Rudbeckia fulgida, variety Solivantii, cultivar, Goldstrom, or Goldsturm? I think it's German. I don't know. One point of confusion that is addressed in the rulebook is that supposedly cultivars cannot be Latinized words, and this is going back to that thing that I was noting about if it's English, it's not italicized. If it's Latin, it's italicized. The one exception to that is that sometimes there are cultivars that are Latinized. So if cultivars cannot technically be Latinized, what about variegata and fastigiata, and my personal favorite, which is an example in this elm tree I like at Philoli Gardens, Ulmus glabra camperdownii. So how are these allowed if you are not allowed to have Latin in the cultivar name? So section 21.11 notes. For a cultivar name to be established on or after the 1st of January 1959, its epithet is to comprise a word or words in any language, but may not be entirely in Latin, except as permitted under Article 21.5, Article 21.6, and Article 21.22. See also Article 21.14 and Article 21.25. So in essence, there are a whole bunch of exceptions. I will not bore you with the specifics, but here are the general exceptions. 1. If the plant got that name before January 1st, 1959, it can keep the name. 2. If a botanical subspecies or variety is no longer recognized by plant taxonomists, it can become a Latinized cultivar name. Which seems silly because it's like literally what's the point of this rule if there's these exceptions? Anyway. 3, if the cultivar can be proved to be legitimate in another alive language other than Latin, so like modern Italian. This nuance causes so much confusion because even if people know this rule, they probably don't know the exceptions or the nuance of this. And it's like, if it's hard to follow the rule, nobody's gonna follow the rule. But now you know, so you can tell your friends, if you're going out there naming plants, don't use a Latinized cultivar. The whole section 21 of the code also includes a whole bunch of other specifics about cultivar names, so if you are going to name a plant, you should probably read that, I guess. But otherwise, you're fine. You don't gotta worry about that. Article 11.6 also notes that any name that breaks any of these rules can still be accepted if it's accepted by the plant's International Cultivar Registration Authority. What is that, you say? International Cultivar Registration Authority is essentially the authority that has been designated as the expert for a specific group of plants. So usually it's like a society, so like Rhododendron Society, Iris Society, Peony Society, Daylily Society. So those societies are the best resource essentially for plant names for that group because they are the registration authority. So I always go to like those websites if I'm looking for a plant name. Next and last, I want to talk about how to properly denote a hybrid. There are multiple ways to do this, and they are all addressed in the code in Division 3. You can simply list the genus name and the cultivar if the parentage is not known, so the two parents of the cross. But if you know the parents of the cross, you can include the genus and then the two species that are being crossed with a multiplication sign in the middle. The code does note that you can also use a lowercase x because that multiplication sign is sometimes hard to get your hands on. So, lowercase x or a multiplication sign. Many hybrids are also named. They are like assigned a Latinized name. So for example, the popular Karl Forster grass, the botanical name for that is Calamagrostis ex acutiflora, Karl Forster, but you can also note it as Calamagrostis arundinacea ex epigejos. And I don't know how to say that, and that's probably why I got a special name in part. But so you can either do the hybrid name that is X acutiflora, or you can use the two parents of the cross and put the X in the middle. Occasionally you will see a hybrid that involves two genera. Genera is the plural of genus. And for these, you want to place the X before the entire name. So an example is X. mangave, which is hybrids between the genus Manfreda and the genus Agave. So those are X. mangave. So that's all I got. That is your rundown on botanical names based on the International Code of Nomenclature for cultivated plants. I really hope this inspired you to go read the document if you want, because it's quite interesting, in my opinion. But if you got the information you needed, then that's also awesome. If you have any lingering questions that I didn't answer, please feel free to leave a comment and I will try my best to address stuff, maybe make another video about this topic. Yeah. Thank you for watching this video, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers!